Greetings, C3RF members across the nation from coast to coast. Welcome to another special edition of In Hot. Today we're going to roll in on cancel culture and a culture that seems to be marching through our institutions, including our professional oversight organizations like the Law Society of Ontario, the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, and taking over these organizations under the guise of mandated diversity, inclusion, and equity programs. These programs, basically, it looks like they bestow special status on some while sucking the life out of a society based on, or supposedly based on, the rule of law. As we roll in on our target today, we're fortunate to have with us an able wingman in the form of Cecil Lyon. He's a bench member or board director of the Law Society of Ontario. But before I get to Cecil, I'd like to special thanks to our sponsor for today's In Hot session. And he wants to remain anonymous, so I won't mention his name, but you know who you are. And for all of you who are interested in sponsoring an In Hot session, if you go to our website, canadiancitizens.org, and you go to the Take Action section, and right up top, we have an article there that talks about sponsors or potential sponsorship and how you can join us. So I'll stop that share right there and introduce our guest, Cecil Lyon. Cecil was called to the bar in 1989. He's been practicing for 30 years. He operates a small family firm, law firm in Canada employing 4 lawyers. He still feels it's a privilege to practice law and hopes to continue to do so for many years to come. His practice focuses on dispute resolution. He's a member of various and diverse legal groups. For over 10 years, he was a regular columnist with the Lawyers Weekly and had fun writing articles under the title In the Trenches. When not in the office, he maintains a semblance of sanity by playing hockey in the winter and after ice out, fly fishing, and kayaking in the summer. Well, welcome aboard to a session of In Hot, Cecil. It's a real pleasure to have you here. And I think I want to kick this off by talking about something called the Statement of Principles. This Statement of Principles was issued by the Law Society of Ontario back in 2017. And it obviously got you and many, many others hot under the collar because you and others organized kind of a coordinated opposition to the Statement of Principles. Can you tell us what the Statement of Principles involved?
Well, thanks for inviting me, Russ. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today. The Statement of Principles was an effort by the Law Society, in our view, to mandate a certain political ideology. And the difficulty that most of us had was that you were commanded by the Law Society, that in order to continue to practice, you needed to have what they called a Statement of Principles. Now, they didn't give you a template, but they did tell you that it had to accord with certain ideological principles. Now, most of those principles we would all agree are good principles. The difficulty that I and others had with it was that it was the Law Society telling us that we needed to effectively post or have a written statement that was personal to us, that reflected that ideology. And one of the first difficulties is with the rule of law. And if you're representing a client, they're not to know your political leanings. I mean, you're there to do the best job you can for that client. And if, for example, you were, let's just say, take a hypothetical, you were representing Ernst Zundel, which one of our members actually did.
Yes.
Mr. Zundel may not have retained that individual had that individual posted on his or her website or on the door of their office sentiments that Mr. Zundel found offensive. And so she or he would have been prevented from having that relationship, or that would have infected the relationship because of the ideological leanings. And that offended from first principles the idea of rule of law, and that, you know, the statue of justice I have in my little waiting room, she's blind.
Yeah. So in other words, you're saying that this really had the power to interfere with the lawyer-client relationship, and the ability of a lawyer to do his best on behalf of his client. I'm going to cut away here and show the audience the statement of principles, and here are some of the key concepts that I think this was put out by the Law Society of Ontario. And it says you're basically, as a lawyer in Ontario, obliged to abide by a statement of principles acknowledging what has come to be known as equality, diversity, and inclusion, the old EDI protocols. And it gives you a preamble there, and it says what you have to what you have to consider in your written statement of principles. And it talks about no discrimination or harassment, abide by workplace policies, promote equality, diversity, inclusion. All these things, I would think, Cecil, are you don't have to tell people not to discriminate in today's Canada. You don't have to tell people how to conduct their business, but it sure looks like they are trying to move things along an ideological line. And now you mentioned very interestingly, the rule of law. And doesn't such a statement of principles, which directs you how to interact with your client, doesn't that go against the rule of law? Aren't there charter rights involved here, like the charter right to conscience, to belief? Is this statement of principles anti-constitutional?
Well, that's a whole other rabbit hole around, fortunately, which we did not have to go, because that was certainly part of the discussion at the time. And I'm going back now to late 2018 into 2019. That was certainly one of the concerns I had. The Law Society of Ontario, in effect, is a quasi-governmental agency, in the sense that we have been delegated by the legislature to run the profession in Ontario. So we're entirely independent. We don't take our marching orders from anybody. And for that privilege of being self-regulating, we have to govern the profession in the public interest. So we have to ensure a minimum level of competence. We have to ensure integrity. We have to ensure good behavior. So that's part of the majority of what the Law Society does, is about disciplining and regulating lawyers. The overreach, as in my view, this clearly was descending into the actual running of your own law firm, to the extent that it was forcing an action, as opposed to not discriminate, not be prejudiced, not in the negative. This was very much, you shall do this.
Yes.
And of course, the Law Society carries the big stick, because if you don't comply with what they say, they yank your license to practice law, and your livelihood is gone.
Was that part of the equation when they came out with the statement of principles back in 2017, that lawyers could be fired? Was that something that came up in the process of this rolling out?
I have not descended into that morass, I suspect, and I would have hoped that it's at some point in time during their deliberations, that previous bench would have discussed that. Mm-hmm. But it was certainly something that we were alive to, at least the group that I ran with in 2019.
Wow. Okay. Now, as you say, I see that we've gone from expectations as a legal organization to actually compelling a person's activities, and that when you talk about compulsion, I think you are probably in territory that where you could say the charter comes into play here in one form or another. But obviously, you were not alone in this, in seeing the problems associated with the statement of principle. And I'll just do another cutaway here, because there was a lot of people who were involved, and so many that I've got this U-Law article here that says more than 1,100 Ontario lawyers moved to defy the Law Society's statement of principles. So there was a coalition of opposition around this particular statement of principles. And I'm just wondering, from an organizational perspective, how did this move from say one person like yourself to involve over 1,000 lawyers? How did this all come together? Was there some sort of a magic moment that happened?
Well, there were three people in particular: Michael Menier, Lisa Bildy, and Professor Bruce Party. He's a professor at Queen's University.
Yes.
In the law school. I was going to say at McDonald Hall, but we've seen what's happened there. They've removed the name McDonald from the name of the law school.
Yes, yes.
So tangentially, we touch upon yet more, in effect, compelled speech,
Yes.
because the Queens bowed to the political expediency and removed Sir John A. Macdonald's name from the law school. And I can tell you, at least anecdotally, the alumni are not happy.
Yes.
And they contribute a lot of money. Anyway, so Lisa, Bruce, and Michael, they took the bull by the horns and began to organize, I think in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And then a call was put out for people interested in putting their money where their mouth was. And I was a late comer because I was unaware. Being in the wilds of Eastern Ontario and not near the big smoke of Toronto, I was unaware, other than I had certainly taken the position myself in my own mind. I was not going to sign the statement of principles. That was an existential matter for me. It was a point of principle that I was going to go to the wall on. Okay. And fortunately, I found them as things happen. And so I asked to join the group, and they very graciously allowed me to join the group. And so I became part of what became known as the Stop
Yes.
Statement of Principles.
Mm-hmm.
And we ran 22 candidates in the 2019 bencher elections, and were successful in electing all 22 candidates with the most votes of any bencher elected in that election. No
When
other
you say bencher, Cecil, when you say bencher, this is just the equivalent of a director of a board, or on a board of directors?
That's okay. An excellent. You get down into the weeds and you forget about the terminology. Yes, bencher was imported. Bencher is what I am. It's actually the name of what effectively is a director of the Law Society. Although there's litigation going on right now, or the Law Society is spending members' money to oppose the effort of one of my colleagues, bencher Murray Klippenstein, his efforts to get information out of the Law Society about what was been called the Challenges Report, which was the genesis for the Statement of Principles and for all of the Law Society's diversity, inclusivity, and equity, or DIE as I call it, efforts. Mm-hmm. And he has now sued the Law Society. So one of our own directors has sued the Law Society to get information about the efforts that they went to that led to the Statement of Principles, because it looks very much, this is important, it looks very much like the survey information that was gathered was insufficient or improperly done, such that any conclusions to be drawn from it were suspect from the get-go. So you start with faulty evidence, and given the world that I inhabit, evidence is critical. You start with faulty evidence that leads to then faulty policies. And so you have a whole house is just teetering. And at the moment, what I see from my perch Is the Law Society doing whatever it can to protect what happened historically, because it doesn't want the embarrassment of what may very well be a slipshod job
Well,
made public?
you're already sitting. I can see that you're sitting on a powder keg here, because if there is some sort of subterfuge in the background about how the statement of principles came about, then that is that's pretty explosive. Now I'm looking at a correlation here, because in around 2017, when this is all happening with the Law Society of Ontario, we see other areas of government jurisdiction, other colleges, other organizations, professional organizations undergoing it. It seems like a simultaneous attack. And I'm thinking 2017 rings a bell for me, because that's when the government came up with its motion M103. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, Cecil, but motion M103 was all about declaring Canada to be systemically racist and Islamophobic, and a country of religious discrimination. And this all led to legislation and money going out the door to support organizations that were, promoting intersectional ideologies, diversity ideologies, and all the rest of it. It all seems to be happening around the same time. So I'm thinking that this lawsuit that's going forward and all the depositions that follow as a result could be extremely eye-opening. And I wasn't aware of that. That's very interesting. Now, go ahead.
Richard Klippenstein is doing absolutely yeoman work in trying to at least, and I'm careful with my words, because we don't know what it's going to ultimately reveal. The suspicion, of course, is when you fight so hard to prevent the information from coming out that there's something to be hidden, especially when you're trying to hide it from one of the directors of the entity,
yes.
who has at common law and under the applicable legislation every right to that information. It doesn't have a good smell to it. But you're right, there was something in the water come mid-2000 teens, 2014. If you follow Jonathan Haidt, he's a psychologist at New York University. He's written extensively about this. Something happened with social media technology, and it affected some changes in the way people thought and behaved. And this manifested itself certainly in the Law Society, leading to the statement of principles.
Yeah, very, very interesting. To think that this might be a widespread, coordinated effort to bring this DIE ideology on board across the board through all our institutions.
Well,
now, as
Russ, it's important. Let me be very clear. I'll put my dispute resolution hat on. The interests. So whether you're on that side of the fence or on this side of the fence, the interests are in equality. The interests, it's a question of how you define it. Those people tend to define it as equality of outcome rather than equality of opportunity.
Yes.
But the basic precepts that come to us from Anglo-Saxon law and our British heritage, our equality, non-discrimination, all of the good things that we applaud as Canadians. It's a question of how to achieve that. And the part of the bigger problem is, and I think social media, and that was my point earlier, has led to this, is the overreach of those others, as I call them, in thinking that Canada is a racist society.
Yes.
Or that systemic discrimination is everywhere. There's no question that there's still racism. There's no question that people are still unpleasant to each other. But unfortunately, that's just the human condition, and nothing we can do ever will extirpate that from society.
No.
But to mandate that type of thinking, to force people into that type of thinking, as opposed to create a culture where, which we've done for the past 150 odd years as Canadians, 155 years, is to really disrespect and minimize the importance of the basics like the rule of law, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, all of the things that the charter speaks to in our society. And
Yes.
For that matter, we have one of the least racist. I mean, I was speaking with a colleague earlier this morning about the recent elections in Ontario, and I pointed out that the Chinese governing body has just gone through its recent elections, and in a country of over 1.3 billion people, they're not going to have one woman on the governing body, not one woman.
Yes.
And that it goes without saying that there's going to be no blacks, no Hispanics, no gays, no trans, nobody other than Chinese males running that country.
Yes.
And the people who spend all of their time pointing out, that Canada is systemically racist, it seems to me that their efforts would be far better spent in trying to affect more significant changes elsewhere. Look at the disaster in Hong Kong, for goodness sake. Yes.
Wow. Now that it seems really, really odd that, as you say, Canada and the Canadian system of governance comes under such scrutiny and is labeled systemically racist when there's so many other areas of the world that by far have worse problems than Canada. But it's Canada, it's the United States, it's basically the West that's being looked at. And I wonder, it's not just about labeling say Canada as being systemically racist. It's about the fact that there's no other narrative allowed. Did you find that as you're going through this process of opposing the statement of principles that it was hard to get a word in edgewise? Like I'm noting that if you pop up and you say that you're against a die ideology, you quickly get slapped down. It's cancel culture at its most powerful. Did you find that that was the case?
Oh, well, it's even more intellectually dishonest than that. Nobody proffers arguments to deal with those types of propositions. What they immediately do is just call you a racist or call you a bigot, right?
Exactly.
They simply resort to ad hominem attacks without dealing with the merits. And we can find no better, because we're both in Ottawa, we can find no better example than the Rouleau Commission that's going on in downtown Ottawa right now.
Yeah.
You had people with a contrary view to the federal government come to Ottawa to protest. Yes, and they disrupted the city. I live here, you live here, no question about it.
Yeah.
But what happened? Our woke prime minister decided to, for the first time ever, invoke the Emergencies Act, which is somewhat ironic given his father did it in 1970, for goodness sake, when it was called the War Measures Act.
Yes.
So in order to effect his political agenda, to impose his woke view of the world on people who had dared to, and whether you agreed with him or not, but they were simply protesting. And by all accounts, and I've not seen all of the Rouleau Commission, but I've been watching snippets, by all accounts had done so peacefully. Now, they were noisy and bothersome, to be sure, but if you live in the nation's capital, unfortunately, it's the cost of just living here.
Yes.
And as a good example, I was listening to some of the evidence yesterday, and the deputy chief of police, Stephen Bell, acting chief now, described what the convoy did as violence.
I saw that. Yeah.
And to me, there's a perfect example of the clear abuse, and I choose my words carefully, abuse of the word violence in contorting it to fit what he wants it to fit, when in fact, as I would describe violence, whether it's a criminal code or anything approaching that, there was no evidence of that at all. But of course, we'll just call it violent. It ergo is violent, and that's bad, and we should get rid of them. And that's the kind of thinking we see from the others when it comes to these types of issues.
Yes, and I see that. I saw that where I guess he was acting chief of police at the time, acting Chief Bell, stated that brought violence into his testimony. But I also see that other police officials, the intel officer associated with the Ontario Provincial Police, I think his name is Morris, he stated that his intel indicated that there was that these people were not extremists, they were not terrorists. He called them regular folk who wanted to protest because they had something that concerned them greatly. And so we have these two different outlooks on what actually happened, and I think that draws to the fore the importance of having an inquiry like we're having with the Emergency Act, where you can actually depose people, where you can actually cross-examine people, because basically that hasn't been happening for a long time, since we started to see this die ideology come forward. Now, you did that with your organization. You opposed. Yeah. And now you have one of you is looking forward to getting deposing information out of the LSO from previous times. Right. I wonder, is this just you, or are there other people interested in what you did and how you did it? Are you getting some interest?
Well, I guess my sense of it, Russ, is this. There are lots of organizations that have been taken over by relatively young activists, because as you and I both know from our experiences on volunteer boards and, volunteering our time for the community, it's the people who are interested who actually get off their butts and get out and do the work. Yeah. And unfortunately, Canadians are relatively, well off, relatively well governed, relatively stable economy, very comfortable, and there's not that same sense of civics that I was raised with. I mean, I'm the fourth generation in my family to run for political office and to be elected. Unfortunately, the three previous generations all did it as mayors. I just only got to do it as a bencher for the Law Society, but so be it. But the point is, you get off your butt and do something, and the rank and file, the people in the trenches, to steal the title of my previous column at the Lawyers Weekly, I think most of them really appreciate what's going on. And the challenge is going to be, can we actually get a representative sampling at the next election? And I'll speak to something that's near and dear to my heart, the voter participation. I mean, we have abysmal voter participation in Canada. The municipal elections are bad. And the Law Society election is another perfect example. I mean, at last election, it was in or about the 30% mark of all eligible lawyers in Ontario voted.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And you get the government you deserve. So if you're not going to get off your butt and do something, at least tick the box for the candidate that you prefer, then sorry, your voice isn't going to get heard. And let's be very clear about this. The others are quite good at organizing. And in fact, there's a group, to speak to my own circumstances. We organized the Stop Stop Slate in 2019, or we, as in Lisa Bildy, Bruce Party, and Michael Manier. And they have taken a leaf out of that book and set up their own. It's called the Good Governance Coalition. Okay. And it's all it's all candidates, and some of them are sitting benchers who, say that the profession needs to be well regulated. Basically, the same things that we would say. Yes, it's a question of how you regulate the profession. Anyway, they want to see us extirpated from the Law Society because we ask the impertinent questions. We challenge the status quo. And I can tell you that 3.5 years into my 4-year term, it's like hitting your head against the wall to do anything at the Law Society.
Okay, I've got another cutaway here. Let's take a look at this. Cecil, that the next set of elections is not too far away, as you say. It's 2023.
Yeah.
And here we have an article here that talks about the creation of a two-party system for the Law Society of Ontario. And it talks about, as you say, the return to good governance from the other side. I guess the other side is developing its own slate, and they're coming out hard to I guess get rid of the stop-sop
Yep.
slate of personalities.
Yes.
So there you have it. It looks like it's going to be a battle royale.
Well, to the extent the lawyers can battle royally, per chance, it should be, as my grandmother would have said, who I love dearly and spent my summers with at her cottage in Lake Winnipeg, it should be good for shits and giggles.
Well, there
But it's about a very, very serious point. And you know, the just as a way of the way that words are being abused, they talk about let's return to good governance. Well, are they suggesting that the Law Society has been badly governed in the past 3.5 years?
exactly. Yeah.
We've reduced the fees for practicing lawyers.
Yes.
By over $400 from because of course, all of these programs, the diversity, inclusivity, and equity, the DI programs cost money.
Yes.
And there's only one source, and that's from the pockets of practicing lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fees were increasing. It had increased to over $2,200 just for the license a year. And as of the last budget, it had dropped to just over $1,800. So what we're seeing by good governance, what that really means is, yeah, and you're going to pay more, and there's going to be more regulation because we're going to tell you what to think, and we're likely going to bring back the statement of principles because God forbid we should allow free agency amongst our members.
You bet. And it looks like we have the statement of principles likely to come back, I would imagine, if the good governance slate wins. But I also think that it looks like there's more in the mix here, because when you talk about reducing fees, when you talk about approaching the money pot, now you get into some pretty sensitive territory there. And I noticed that you've said that, and your slate have said that there's something of mission creep at play here. And I'm just going to go to a next cutaway.
Sure.
And this is from the LSO, and it says this is what the Law Society is supposed to do. It's supposed to protect the public interest. It's act in a timely, open, and efficient manner. It regulates the licenses and disciplines lawyers who get out of line. So that's pretty a pretty narrow thing that they're being that they're supposed to do. But it looks like they're doing an awful lot more than that. And
well, to answer that question directly, and I see this all over the place. We saw it in the recent municipal election, certainly in Ottawa, the difference between Mark Sutcliffe and Catherine McKinney.
Yes.
Is you have a certain, you're elected to a certain function, whether it's in municipal politics or federal or provincial, or as a bench of the Law Society. You fit into that function, and it's about regulating, as you correctly point out, because you use the Law Society website. It's a very narrow scope.
Yeah.
Younger activists, if I'll call them, the others, they want to do more than that, which is laudable. It's how that manifests itself. So they want to do all of the good things off the back of lawyers that should be done through the provincial legislature, or dare I say it, if they're really that interested, run for federal politics and get elected and change the legislation that governs Canada.
Yes.
The reality is it's fitting a round peg into a square hole, and we're about just staying within our lane. And what they're going to say, of course, is, well, the cause of justice, which is part of the, you can subsume a lot within that, but I think you have to look at the words around it: rule of law, competence and protecting the public. And those words have to be constrained by the whole, which is not then about, effecting social justice in Zimbabwe or, dealing with whatever other issues you may want to that tickle your political fancy.
Yeah, in other words, City Hall is supposed to be there to take the garbage in, keep the roads maintained, and provide the basic services. And instead, boom, they're arcing off into this world of social justice and coming up with a lot of things that cost an awful lot of money.
Well, I mean, and the best example of that is you've got all these city mayors wanting a seat at the big table, talking about environmental crises and climate action and what we can do, and banning cars. And you have Sadiq Khan in London, England, effectively banning cars in downtown London, creating all sorts of havoc. And there's it's the conflation of the problem that I have an intellectual problem with. It's, yes, we have some climate issues, but City Hall is not the forum and is not the venue to deal with those. There's an appropriate forum and place to deal with it. And if you want to do that, then get elected to Parliament.
Yeah. Well, I certainly hope that your slate is successful. I really do see a battle for it. I'll be keeping a close eye on it, because I think this is extremely important, and you're kind of treading new ground that other organizations, other professional organizations might want to consider treading and exploring.
Well, and as we discussed offline, I know that the organizers of the Stop Stop slate have been contacted from different organizations throughout the world to say, hey, how did you do that? How did you fight back against the wokesters? Wow. Because there's, aside from Bill Maher and, John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry and Thomas Sowell and Joe Rogan, there are not that many voices out there that try to argue for some balance and some perspective. So that's, anyway, it's going to be challenging. I haven't decided whether I'm going to run. You may be familiar with the Greek myth of Sisyphus rolling the ball up the hill and having it come back down and rolling it up again. My 3.5 years has made me think of Sisyphus quite often. So the whether or not there's any utility in continuing the fight for me personally is a decision I have yet to make, because it requires, it's an unpaid position. And it requires a huge amount of time. Right, as you well know, to do any of this sort of.
This is striking a familiar chord.
And that's part of the reason why people are out there busy making a living and don't have time for a lot of this.
Well, I certainly thank you for rolling that ball up the hill so many times in the past 3.5 years.
I've been, I'll end with this. Excuse me. You had asked earlier how we all came together. There was, aside from the three organizers I've mentioned, it was a coalescing of a very, and I use the term deliberately, diverse group around what we saw as something antithetical to the rule of law and our Canadian traditions. We have quite diverse backgrounds. We have quite diverse political leanings, from the far conservative, from a true blue conservative, through to a guy who's never voted NDP, not voted for anybody other than NDP his whole life. So we cover the traditional political spectrum, and we found common ground. And quite frankly, the 21 other people that I was elected with in the group I like to think, are now all fast friends, and they're all very bright people and articulate and thoughtful, and truly want what's best. And I take nothing from the others. They want what's best. It's a question of how we get there.
Yeah, isn't that odd that concepts like the rule of law, our charter guaranteed individual and fundamental rights and freedoms can unite such a diverse group of people. But it seems like it's the kind of diversity that a lot of people don't want to see happen these days. And that's kind of odd, a little bit ironic.
The irony exactly is that whenever I hear the term diversity, inclusivity, and equity,
Yeah.
I know that's really Orwellian speak for you have to agree with me, otherwise you're a racist.
Exactly.
Whereas on the other side, I like to think of myself, if not quite a libertarian, a traditional 19th century small L liberal.
Yes.
Which is the tradition that this country, had from the get-go.
Yep.
And I think we would be ill-served if it died. I
think that is exactly true. I think if we lose that kind of a heritage, that kind of a tradition, then I think we don't live in a Canada that's strong and free anymore. We live in something else. But
correct. And you devoted a great deal of your life to protecting this Canada strong and free.
Well, exactly. And I think for myself, speaking from my own personal viewpoint, I was called out to go into combat for Canada, first Persian Gulf War as a fighter pilot. And I really believe that I was fighting for a Canada strong and free, one that guaranteed individual rights and freedoms, free speech. And that's basically why I started doing what I'm doing now with C3RF, because I see that being eroded and being flushed. And it's an awful shame that this is a country that deserves to be fought for at this point in time, anyway. Yes. But that's pretty heady stuff, Cecil. But that's what it's all about, and I think that's what motivates the both of us.
Well, what motivates me is I have a son. I have 4 nephews. I have a niece, all of whom I'm very close with. And that's what motivates me is I want to think that the culture that I was raised in, I grew up in the north end of Winnipeg, which is a multicultural as it comes. That's the kind of society that I want to see them inherit long after I'm dead.
Oh, hear for that. Before I leave you, Cecil, I'd like to just go back and remind folks that if they want to sponsor an in-hot session like the one we just had, they can go to the CanadianCitizens.org site, go to Take Action, and right at the top there, you can see all the details on how to do just that. With that, thanks very much, Cecil. This has been a very enlightening conversation, and thank you very much for rolling that ball uphill.
I would be remiss if I didn't thank Dan Mayo for connecting the two of us.
Yes.
So my thanks to Mr. Mayo, and my thanks to you for reaching out and for giving me an opportunity to chat with you this afternoon.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, sir.
Until
the best. Next time.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.